April 28, 1945. British internment camp number 47, near Alexandria, Egypt. The desert wind had teeth that night. A dozen Italian women sat close together, wrapped in coarse blankets that smelled of salt and soap. Lucia Moretti, 42, nurse from Naples, kept count of the knocks that echoed beyond the compound fence. Somewhere out there, the British patrol changed shift, the metallic rhythm of rifles being slung, boots grinding gravel. But this time the sound came closer. Boots stopped outside their door. 3 firm knocks. Silence. No one breathed. The youngest girl, barely 19, clutched the hem of Lucia's sleeve. "E Pinoy," she whispered. "Is it for us?" Lucia didn't answer. She rose slowly, joints stiff from the cold, and glanced toward the door, a warped plank held by a single bolt. Rumors had been spreading all week. Mussolini captured. Italian officers executed in the north. Some said Allied guards were taking revenge in hidden camps across the desert. Others said the women would be questioned about their families' loyalties, the traitors who had once cheered for Illinois Juice. Outside, a key scraped against metal. Lucia's stomach tightened. She motioned for the others to stay seated. The bolt slid. The door opened with a sigh of air. Lantern light spilled across 3 British uniforms, sand-caked, sleeves rolled, faces drawn from fatigue rather than malice. The one in front, a young lieutenant barely older than Lucia's own son, blinked against the smoke and lowered his head slightly, as if entering a chapel. "Evening, ladies," he said. His accent was clipped, careful. "Permission to step in." None of the women moved. Their eyes darted from his holstered revolver to the tin box he carried under one arm. Behind him, 2 soldiers shifted uneasily, avoiding the women's gaze. Lucia's pulse pounded. Every instinct told her to expect humiliation, a search, a punishment, a display of power. She had seen enough soldiers to know how such nights began. The lieutenant nodded toward the wooden crate near the wall. "Just a moment," he said softly, placing the box down. The soldiers followed, setting smaller parcels beside it. He opened the lid with a metallic click. Inside, under folded paper, lay neat rows of Cadbury chocolate bars. For a long time, no one spoke. The women stared as though at contraband from another world. The foil caught the lantern's light, glinting like coins. The air filled with a faint, sweet scent, cocoa, sugar, something impossibly gentle amid the stench of kerosene and dust. One of the soldiers, red-haired and freckled, gave a half-smile. "War's near over," he muttered, half to himself. "Figured it's time for something decent." Lucia didn't move. The thought of kindness felt like a trap. Their captors had brought rations before, bread so stale it cracked the teeth, tins of fish shared between 10. But this, chocolate, was something intimate, almost tender. The lieutenant spoke again, awkwardly. "It's from our stores. Red Cross sent parcels. We've plenty. Thought you might like." He stopped, realizing how absurd the sentence sounded in a camp surrounded by barbed wire. A murmur rippled through the women. Francesca, the youngest, stepped forward a hesitant inch. "Pinoy?" she asked. "For us?" He nodded once. She reached out, took a single bar, and held it like a relic. The foil trembled in her hand. Lucia's throat tightened. The sound of foil tearing was shockingly loud in the silence. The smell hit first, warm, bittersweet, memory-laden. Naples, 1939. A bakery window glowing with pralines before the war. Her little brother licking sugar dust from his fingers. Her mother laughing. Lucia broke off a square and placed it on her tongue. The taste was unbearable. Sweetness after years of rationed bread and boiled beans. Her eyes filled, but she turned away so no one would see. Behind her, the British officer cleared his throat. "There'll be more tomorrow. Red Cross parcels, soap, maybe tea. Lights out at 10. He took a step back, uncomfortable with their silence, and gave a small nod. "Good night, ladies." The soldiers followed him out. The door shut with a soft thud. For a moment, no one moved. Then Francesca whispered, "They brought us chocolate." Lucia looked down at her hands, the tiny brown square melting slowly between her fingers. She had imagined so many endings to this war: defeat, humiliation, interrogation, maybe a bullet if luck ran out. Not this. Not kindness, quiet and clumsy, delivered through a tin box under desert stars. Outside, the guard's footsteps faded. Somewhere a dog barked near the wire. Inside, the women unwrapped the rest of the bars, one by one. The sound of foil replaced the sound of crying. Lucia leaned against the cold wall, staring at the lantern flame. It trembled in the draught, just like her pulse. "Why?" she whispered, mostly to herself. "After all this, why?" No one answered. Beyond the walls, the desert exhaled, and the night returned to its stillness. The women ate slowly, as if afraid the sweetness might vanish if swallowed too quickly. Some smiled for the first time in months. Lucia stayed awake long after the others slept. She could still taste the chocolate on her tongue, not as food, but as proof of something she had forgotten could exist: mercy. In a war of cruelty and noise, the most disarming thing of all was quiet kindness. Dawn crept over the desert in a silver wash, making the sand shimmer like powdered glass. The barracks were quiet except for the soft scrape of broom bristles across the wooden floor and the occasional cough from a woman who hadn't slept well. Outside, the camp hummed with life: the low murmur of soldiers preparing breakfast, the hiss of a kettle over coals, and the clatter of mess tins being stacked. Lucia rose first, dragging herself out of her cot. The chocolate from the night before had brought little sleep. The taste lingered, sweet and improbable, reminding her that fear could be broken by something so simple. She helped the youngest girls wash their faces with water drawn from a half-frozen bucket. Each splash carried grit and dust from the desert, but also a faint comfort. A Red Cross parcel sat on the wooden crate, partially opened. Inside, biscuits, tinned fruit, soap, and a folded note written in careful, looping script. "May this small gift remind you the war will end soon. Sister Margaret, Alexandria." Lucia ran her fingers over the paper. The act of handwriting, deliberate and gentle, carried more weight than any command or ration. It felt like someone had reached across the gulf of fear and isolation to say, "You matter." By mid-morning, Francesca and 2 others were assigned to laundry duty near the perimeter fence. The sand rose around their bare feet, hot despite the early hour. Beyond the wire, British cooks smoked and joked, the aroma of frying onions drifting across the compound. Francesca hesitated when a pair of them waved, then stepped forward cautiously. One of the cooks, Sergeant Moore, older, kind-eyed, held up a cigarette. "Won't bite," he said with a faint grin. "Just smoke if you like." Francesca took it. The smoke curled up her nose, foreign and sharp, but somehow human. The gesture was small, trivial even, but it carried a weight the women weren't ready to name. Here, in the middle of the desert, an enemy had offered something ordinary: recognition of their humanity. Later, the sergeant returned with a small tray of boiled potatoes and weak tea. Francesca hesitated again, then tasted it. It was hot, bland, nourishing, and somehow restorative. "Thank you," she said softly. He shrugged. "You've seen enough hate. Let's not add to it." The morning stretched into afternoon. Inside the barracks, the women sat cross-legged around a low table, opening more parcels. Bread, cheese, tins of fish, sugar cubes. Lucia unfolded a small cloth and laid the food neatly. Each woman took what she could, careful and quiet. Francesca hummed a faint Neapolitan lullaby, and the others joined in softly, hesitant at first, then growing in confidence. Their song carried through the open door, reaching the ears of guards outside who did not interrupt, a fragile bridge forming in silence. Later, the women were allowed to write letters home. The pencils were stubby, the paper rough, but they wrote with care. Lucia's hand trembled as she scribbled lines to her mother. To Mama, I am alive. The British are not what we were told. The words felt strange, even rebellious. Back home, propaganda had painted every Allied soldier as cruel and unfeeling. Now, she wondered if her fear had been a shadow, a story told to make survival easier. Night fell, and the desert wind returned. The barracks smelled of dust, tea, and candle smoke. Lucia and Francesca sat side by side, whispering. Francesca, do you think they pity us? Lucia, no. Pity doesn't bring chocolate. Conscience does. The words lingered. The distinction was subtle but profound. They were not being pitied. They were being treated decently because someone had chosen to act morally, even in a war zone. That evening, Lieutenant Harris returned to deliver another small parcel. He spoke quietly, almost embarrassed. Word is, you'll all be processed soon. Sent home eventually. Francesca's voice, tentative. And you? What will you do? Go home. Try to forget the sand, maybe. Lucia studied his face, noting the fatigue, the youth, the absence of hatred. Enemy lines dissolved in that moment, not through words, but through gestures, through shared vulnerability. The night's quiet brought more reflection. Lucia traced the tin lids, the folded letters, the tea stains on the table. Each small act of kindness, each ordinary offering, built a bridge over years of indoctrination and fear. She understood now that respect did not require heroism, and compassion did not require loyalty. It only required conscience. As they prepared for sleep, the women gathered near the window to watch the desert stars. A crescent moon hung low, silvering the dunes. The barracks were no longer merely a cage. They were a space where humanity had found purchase, fragile and tentative, yet undeniable. Before closing her eyes, Lucia pulled out the last piece of chocolate from the previous night. She broke it in half and handed one piece to Francesca. The gesture was unspoken, a bond formed in shared experience, in trust slowly rebuilt. The crackle of foil echoed softly in the barracks, a sound that had become a motif of hope. In the desert, among the wire and the sand, the women felt, for the first time in months, that the world could hold decency as well as cruelty. The day ended without ceremony, without fanfare. Only small, deliberate acts, tea, letters, chocolate, and song, stitched together a sense of order and dignity. And for Lucia, for Francesca, and for the others, the understanding was clear. Fear could be replaced, gradually, with recognition of shared humanity. The desert was golden that morning, the sun cutting across the dunes with a clarity that hurt the eyes. Camp life had shifted subtly since the news arrived. The war in Europe had ended. Gunfire from distant Allied celebrations echoed faintly over the sand, but inside the barracks, the Italian women sat quietly, as though the noise belonged to another world. A messenger delivered official papers. They were to be processed and returned to Italy within the month. Relief mingled with disbelief. Freedom was imminent, yet it carried a weight they hadn't anticipated. The weight of reclaiming themselves after years of fear, dislocation, and doubt. Lucia held her document in both hands, tracing the typed letters with a finger. Around her, women folded their few possessions into bundles. Faded scarves, tattered shoes, a small tin that had once contained chocolate, now empty. The barracks smelled faintly of soap, dust, and lingering cocoa. Each scent carried memory. The memory of fear, the memory of kindness. Lieutenant Harris and Sergeant Moore appeared that evening, carrying 2 modest parcels. Inside were biscuits, chocolate, and cigarettes. Not rations to sustain bodies, but gifts meant to mark farewell, human connection, and a tentative hope. Harris shifted his weight nervously. For your journey home. Courtesy of the Crown, I suppose, he said. Hands full. Francesca, cheeks flushed, held out a small tin in return. Inside, she had drawn a simple sketch: the lantern light in the barracks, the chocolate tin on the crate, and the word Gracie written carefully at the bottom. The gesture was delicate, intimate, a thank you that words could not fully capture. Harris took it, almost unable to speak. Sergeant Moore gave a faint nod, eyes misting slightly. It was rare, these moments of acknowledgement in a world defined by conflict. Silence fell, soft but heavy with meaning. The next morning, trucks rumbled across the sand, ready to carry the women back to Alexandria. The guards lined the path, not as wardens now, but as escorts ensuring safety. The women climbed aboard slowly, carrying their small bundles of belongings and parcels. The desert wind stirred around them, lifting sand into the sunlight, catching each hair, each fold of fabric. Francesca broke her last piece of chocolate in two and handed half to Lucia. The gesture was simple, almost ritualistic, yet profoundly symbolic. What had begun as a fearful night filled with anticipation of humiliation now ended in an exchange of shared humanity. The chocolate, once a token of disbelief, had become a bridge between captors and captives, fear and trust, enemy and human. As the convoy rolled toward Alexandria, Lucia looked back at the camp. The barbed wire glinted under the sun, the lanterns were gone, and the barracks appeared empty, but for the memory they carried. She traced the horizon with her eyes, imagining the desert wind moving through the camp long after they were gone. Somewhere, the British soldiers continued their routine: breakfast, tea, tidying, laughter. Somewhere, someone would recall the faces of the Italian women, perhaps not with precision, but with faint recognition that they had been witnesses to an unexpected grace. Inside the trucks, the women were quiet. Some stared out at the dunes, some held their parcels tightly. Each thought returned to small, unremarkable acts: a tin of chocolate, a cup of tea, a cigarette offered through a wire fence. Each act carried a weight far greater than any military order, any political decree. They remembered the soldiers' faces, tired, uncertain, humane, and realized that in this tiny corner of the world, decency had triumphed over fear. Lucia's mind lingered on the night they had first been given chocolate. She remembered the swaying lantern, the trembling foil, the disbelief, and the first tentative taste. Then the hum of song, the letters, the shared meals. She understood now that freedom was not merely the absence of captivity. It was the presence of moral choice, of recognition, of human responsibility extended across barriers. The trucks rumbled on, carrying them back toward the coast, toward ships and the long journey home. The desert stretched endlessly, bright and desolate, but the women carried their own light, the memory of kindness in a place where cruelty had been expected. Francesca hummed the Neapolitan lullaby once more, softly, and the others joined, each voice a note of reconciliation with themselves and the world. As evening fell, a reflective narrator's voice might have said, "Records show hundreds of Italian civilians were interned in British camps across Egypt. Few remembered their guards' faces. Fewer still remembered the names of the men who brought rations or tidied the barracks. But some remembered the night fear turned sweet, and the sound of foil breaking became more resonant than any gunshot." Lucia broke her final chocolate bar in half, savoring the faint taste. Not as food, but as memory. The convoy carried them across the desert, the wind whispering stories of mercy, courage, and restraint. They had expected humiliation when the guards knocked. Instead, they had been offered chocolate. History remembered who won. But humanity remembers who showed mercy. The sun dipped below the horizon. Sand shifted silently in its golden light. The camp, the soldiers, the women, all remained, in memory, tethered by a fragile thread of decency. And in that quiet, the moral of their story endured.